When The Week Before came out, I got it pretty much immediately, but I was about 2 to 3 months late to actually read it. The second interactive novel, Return to the Pit, came out on Christmas Eve, and I thought I should probably not be that late this time. Luckily, I was on winter break at the time, giving me lots of time to read this book. Unluckily, I had a lot of schoolwork to do, and then I had exams to prepare for, not to mention I hung out with my friends a whole bunch, and have a job, which all really hindered my ability to actually work on videos. Not that I didn't have time outside of all that, I was just always too tired to work. So I still ended up being late for the book. But I am happy to report that I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's quite significantly shorter than The Week Before, but it still has plenty of interesting things to note. It's a very weird book that opens up a lot of questions, and also may answer some stuff too. I'm also happy to report that, although I went on like a month-long hiatus, I am back to making videos hopefully regularly, and hopefully it will stay that way. So without further ado, let's avoid being any later than we already are and actually start talking about Return to the Pit. Number 1. On page 23, Oswald falls asleep while watching a movie with his parents. He has a nightmare where he is in the ball pit that was in the corner of Jeff's Pizza, only the pit is infinite and he was trapped in it. Keep in mind, this is in the path where Oswald never goes to Jeff's. He decides to avoid Jeff's after this nightmare. However, I think it was supposed to have the opposite effect. In stories like Fetch, and most apparently the 8th Fazbear Frights epilogue, Freddy's locations reach out to people to try and lure them in. Larson even has visions of the ball pit itself. I think that's what was happening here, Oswald having visions of the pit to try to lure him in, yet instead turning him away from it, but still ruining his life anyway. Number 2. On page 4, we can actually see a logo for Jeff's Pizza. This logo matches the one we see on the Jeff's Pizza building in the Into the Pit graphic novel, but weirdly doesn't match the one seen in the Into the Pit game. I find it a little weird that it's different in the game, and also that this is the one shown here though. I'd have thought the game one would be the canon design since the graphic novel artists are given a bit more free will than the game designers, but I don't really know. Number 3. This book is written really weirdly. It's kind of hard to explain, but some pages leading to pages don't really match what's happening, while the other pages seem like they would lead into those pages and then they just don't. But even weirder, there's something that just doesn't make sense. On page 13, Oswald opts to not watch a movie with his parents, leaving them on the couch and going to his room. He gets a text from his friend Ben, and you decide whether you ignore it or respond. If you ignore it and go to bed, you go to page 23, which I already discussed. But that page has Oswald wake up from sleep and look over at his parents who are still watching the movie. But that doesn't make sense because on this path, Oswald is in his room and not watching the movie anymore. It doesn't make sense. Overall, it's just not written nearly as well as The Week Before is, and the page layout is also just a bit different and honestly inferior for this type of book. Number 4. In the 8th Fazbear Frights epilogue, we get the reveal that Into the Pit is not actually time travel. The ball pit is essentially where Eleanor keeps the souls of her victims, and the agony of the missing children incident is also just present in the pit. In the story, Oswald is actually just experiencing the memories of someone. Given what a lot of people said about this book before I read it, which I will talk about later, it's a little weird to say, but this book actually acknowledges the fact that the pit is made up of memories and not actual time travel. On page 101 and 103, it is stated that Oswald can tell he is experiencing memories that aren't his own, and although he has free will, the events of the original memory still have to be fulfilled one way or another, something I will talk about later. Number 5. One small and probably insignificant detail I noticed on page 35 is that there's an image of a Freddy Fazbear action figure, but on his chest are 2 buttons. The rest of the actual figure is more in line with FNaF 1 Freddy, who doesn't have buttons, but Withered Freddy, who was the Freddy from the first Freddy's location, does have 2 buttons. A debate that stirred a while ago was whether or not unwithered animatronics actually existed, or if the original animatronics are just the FNaF 1 designs and the withers only look different for the sake of looking different and being more unique than the FNaF 1 animatronics. But this may be an indication that the unwithereds do exist, or at least that there are some canonical differences between them and the classics. Number 6. On page 105, Chip and Mike ask Oswald what movies he likes, and he says E.T. They question him because E.T. was 3 years old, and they ask if he actually has movie theaters where he lives. Oswald claims they do, but that they also have Netflix, YouTube, and TikTok, but he obviously can't tell them that. What's interesting is that this is taken directly from the original Into the Pit story, as are a few other conversations throughout this book, but the original story did not mention TikTok. Hell, page 40 of this book is essentially the same page as page 105, and yet there he also doesn't say TikTok. This was deliberately added to page 105. This gives us an indication of when this story takes place, as TikTok was originally Musical.ly and rebranded to TikTok on August 2nd, 2018, meaning Into the Pit takes place after that. In the Into the Pit game, you can find a calendar, and that calendar actually matches the year 2018, so it's possible that is the year of the story. Number 7. On page 114, Oswald escapes outside, but hears a little girl asking for help. He finds his way to the source of the noise and finds that it's actually not a little girl. Quote, "You stop on the 3rd step down. About 5 more steps away, sitting in the shadows, you see a toy doll that resembles a little girl. She has red hair and pigtails and is wearing a red dress to match her hair. Her face, legs, and arms are bone white, and she has a blood red nose and crimson circles on her cheeks. Her entire appearance is unnerving. She is silent." End quote. At first, I thought this was a doll version of Pigtail Girl from FNaF 4, just because I didn't expect it to be an actual animatronic doll, and thought it would be a random doll belonging to a little girl, but she doesn't have a red dress, red cheeks, or a red nose, or white skin, only pigtails which are orange and not red. Then I thought it was Eleanor, since she is responsible for the story, and I thought she matched the description, but she actually doesn't have a red nose, so it can't be her. So this doll is of course Circus Baby, who checks all the boxes. Interestingly, the Into the Pit game also has a poster on the wall of Circus Baby. It seems as if these Into the Pit retellings are trying to hammer home the point that Circus Baby's Pizza World already existed before the missing children incident, placing Elizabeth's death before it. Number 8. On page 117, Oswald escapes out into the world of 1985 when suddenly the world spins and he finds himself back in his time. However, now he is aged into an older man, seeming to be in his 40s. A lot of people have started saying that because of this book, and things like this in the book, that the story is actually time travel, but the entire point of the story of Into the Pit is memories, and it is confirmed already to not be real time travel. I think the point is less actual time travel, and more so just Agony affecting Oswald somehow. It's weird, but Agony does a lot of weird things. Spring Bonnie is part of the 1985 memory, and he manifests in the real world because of Agony, so this being Agony works just fine. It's just such a weird moment though, and it kinda just causes extra confusion, and I was hoping when I read this part that it would be the only point of confusion, but nope. It gets way worse later. Number 9. On page 116, Oswald tries to escape his house and go to a neighbor's house, but when he makes it to the house, Chica is in place of the neighbor, just like how Spring Bonnie is in the place of Oswald's dad. This is interesting because it's clear that Spring Bonnie isn't an illusion. It really isn't Oswald's dad. I mean, Oswald's dad is in the pit, and Spring Bonnie attacks Oswald multiple times, even trying to run him over with a car on page 64. So, does the same go for Chica? Is this also an Agony manifestation of Chica that is now in the real world, or is it just Oswald's neighbor and he's just seeing her as Chica? The end of page 116 implies Chica and Spring Bonnie attack Oswald together, so it seems like it's an Agony creature too. Or is Oswald still just in the pit, no longer in a memory, but just in a fake reality? Think about it, the beginning of the book is the beginning of summer, but by this point in the story, it's the first day of school. In the original book, there seems to be a time jump, but in this book, there isn't. It's literally only been a few days of summer. Oswald thinks it's just because 1985 has been distracting him and making time fly by, but it doesn't make sense. It's literally only been a few days of summer. So maybe Oswald is just in a fake reimagining of the world, similar to the Tales story Under Construction, where everyone sees everyone as normal, but the main character Maya is the only person who sees them as jelly blobs with seemingly malicious intent, just like the Spring Bonnie and Chica in this book. The stories are pretty similar, so maybe that's what's happening here. Number 10. Follow up to the last point and the point about the story being actual time travel, on page 121, Oswald meets a grown-up version of Chip who remembered Oswald and had a team of people working to take down the rabbit. Apparently, other people had also been time jumping back to 1985. This makes absolutely no sense. Spring Bonnie is not his own thing. He is the memory of William Afton during the missing children incident, and when he comes out of the ball pit, he is simply an Agony manifestation of him from the memory. The idea of him being a known threat to people is problematic to the plot of the story. Also, Chip is implying that the ball pit actually is time travel, because he remembers Oswald and not the person that Oswald is in the memory of. And the ball pit is actually just a memory thing, so that's really weird. The person in the pit is experiencing a warped version of someone else's memory, but the actual event of the missing children incident does not include the name Oswald at all, or the kid looking like Oswald, because that is not the identity of the person Oswald replaces. The pit should not affect the past at all, so why is it happening? Because the story being time travel is confirmed false by the Stitch line, which the original Into the Pit story is a part of, so in that case, it seems like the only option is that everything that happens after Oswald gets out of the pit, up until Oswald saving his dad, is still happening in the pit, and that it's just a warped reality. That would also explain why time passes when Oswald gets out of the pit after the missing children incident, even though that hadn't happened before. And it actually explains quite a lot more. There's a theory that's been going around that Into the Pit could even be an actual loop, but perhaps I'll talk about that in a future theory. Number 11. On page 127, the book actually makes a mistake. The interactive novels are written in a second-person perspective, meaning they refer to the main character as you. This remains consistent for the whole book, except on this page. Oswald meets Gabrielle and it says, "She smiles as she shakes my hand firmly and then releases it." Long story, I say. It's just a small error, but I wanted to point it out because I'm an asshole. Also, interestingly, Gabrielle in this book is Chip's daughter. Gabrielle was a character in the original story who was Oswald's motivation to not give up after she gave insight into Greek mythology, which she still does on different paths in this book too. It's interesting that she's Chip's daughter here though, not to mention a part of Chip's group trying to destroy Spring Bonnie. Number 12. In the original Into the Pit story, Oswald claims that there were half a dozen dead kids in the party room, meaning 6, even though the missing children incident only had 5 dead kids. The Into the Pit game repeats this. However, on page 71, this book claims that there are only 5 dead kids, and that they were found in a storage room. This is much more accurate to how it goes down in the games, the 5 kids being lured to the safe room, which is largely used as a storage room. I find it really interesting how all 3 different versions of Into the Pit have pretty big differences from each other. Hell, technically 4 if you include the graphic novel, which has a couple small differences as well. Number 13. One interesting thing to note is that Oswald collects things in 1985, like bunny ears or a flashlight, but on page 79, he still has them, even though the ball pit is just memories and not time travel. But as I've already discussed, Spring Bonnie is also just a part of the memory, and he exists here too, so it could just be agony manifestations of those things. Similar stuff happens in the game, so it's not that shocking. However, as I already talked about, the book seems like it's trying to indicate that the story is actual time travel, even though the Stitch line confirms it isn't. Like I said before, it's possible this is a warped, fake recreation of the real world. So maybe that's why this stuff is here for Oswald, because none of it is real anyway. Number 14. On page 129, Oswald theorizes that maybe if he puts the rabbit ears he'd gotten in 1985 on his head, Spring Bonnie might think Oswald is a rabbit like him and leave him alone. This reminds me a lot of the mask mechanic from FNaF 2, where the player has to wear a Freddy mask to trick the animatronics into thinking he is one of them, so they leave him alone. Right after that, on page 138, Oswald does put them on, but he feels stupid. Suddenly, the band attached to the ears that he put on his head clamps down onto the sides of his head. Instead of crying out in pain, he feels relaxed. He feels like he actually is a bunny. And he goes to the dinner table and sits with his family, his mom also wearing rabbit ears. And then there is a game over. This is interesting because the way the ears clamp onto the sides of his head remind me of Springlock failures, especially how one is depicted in the Tales story Pressure. Then, the way Oswald feels like he becomes the rabbit reminds me of how Afton becomes one with Spring Bonnie, claiming in the Silver Eyes that he is an animatronic and also following his program to be lured towards the sound of children in FNaF 3 and 6. He's still Afton, but he is also Springtrap. Here, Oswald is still Oswald, but he is also a bunny. Number 15. On page 24, Oswald uses the gold token bonus item on an arcade game called 8-Bit Escape, which has a pixelated yellow rabbit face on it. The machine had said a special gold token is required, and when Oswald uses his gold token and starts the game, the world around him suddenly changes. When he comes to, he finds himself inside the game, in an 8-bit version of Freddy's. No one is around, but everything from Freddy's is still here. In playing this game, he is sucked into it, living within an actual 8-bit world. This is very reminiscent of Help Wanted 2, where we need a special token to play the Princess Quest arcade. At first we just play the game, but eventually the world around us changes and we find ourselves in the actual game, in the 8-bit world. Also, the fact that Oswald found himself to also be 8-bit reminds me a lot of the actual Into the Pit game, which I don't think is 8-bit, but it is pixelated. Number 16. When Oswald begins playing the game, he explores Freddy's. In the spot the ball pit should be, Oswald finds a table with a cake at the far end of it, and chairs set up for people to sit at, but no one is sitting at it. At the end of what Oswald assumed was a hallway was an exit door. Instantly, I recognize this as Happiest Day, or something similar to Happiest Day. We start next to the exit door, and there's a 2D corridor. At the end of it is a table with a cake at the far end of it, and it starts with no one there. But, as we play the minigames, the kids are added to the minigame next to the table. Soon after, Oswald finds 4 kids tied to chairs asking for help, and Spring Bonnie then adds a 5th, and Oswald goes on his way to try and save them. Then, on page 83, Oswald gives cake to the kids, beating the game and killing the rabbit. When he comes to, he is back in the present at Jeff's, and he finds a newspaper with a clipping saying 5 kids were saved in 1985, and the person in the rabbit suit was arrested. Disregarding the nonsensicalness of changing the timeline, this is very interesting to a lot of people. It is said that the last child Oswald gives cake to is a girl with curly hair. People have interpreted this as being Cassidy, because the last person who gets cake in Happiest Day is Golden Freddy, who is probably Cassidy and or the bite victim, but it's a girl, so probably Cassidy. People also say that this means Cassidy has curly hair, and therefore is probably the body in the new kid. However, there's some problems with this. The new kid Freddy's is not the original Freddy's, meaning that body in the new kid isn't anyone from the missing children incident, and so it isn't Cassidy and probably isn't Andrew either. Also, that's assuming the order Oswald gave the cake matters in the first place. Cassidy being a girl is undeniable, but the diagram in the logbook seems to be her, and she has pigtails, not curly hair. There is another girl in the missing children incident though, and that's Susie, and her hair is very much curly, so she can very well be the girl being referred to. There's also a page showing a girl with pigtails in Return to the Pit. Not only does that match Cassidy in the logbook, but the girl with pigtails and the girl with curly hair are clearly not the same, meaning there's 2 girls killed in the incident, meaning Cassidy is a girl anyway. The curly-haired girl isn't Cassidy, it's Susie, and the pigtailed girl is Cassidy. Sure, the curly-haired girl gets the cake last, which you'd think would be the Golden Freddy spirit, not just randomly Chica, judging by Happiest Day, but this isn't literally Happiest Day. It's reminiscent of it, sure, but Happiest Day is about setting the dead kids free. This is about stopping them from dying in the first place. Plus, Chica was the first to die, so maybe she's the last to be saved. Number 17. In the week before, there was a page that you can only reach if you cheated and went to a page that you needed an item for that wasn't actually in the book. This book has something pretty much exactly the same, where in the 8-bit world, page 62 tells you to go to page 162 if you have a map. But there isn't actually a map in this book. So, when you go to page 162, you get a game over and a message not to cheat. This message is actually the exact same message as the one in the week before. The only difference is that in the week before it says the purple man, while in this book it says the yellow rabbit. Number 18. The last thing I wanted to talk about in this video is the 6th kid. In the original Into the Pit, as well as the game, the missing children incident consisted of 6 dead kids. However, in the game's timeline, it was only 5, and this book adopted that, having only 5 missing kids. So why is it different from the other depictions of Into the Pit? Well, I think this book is trying to tell us what the purpose of the 6th kid actually is. The 6th kid is Oswald. Remember, this story and the ball pit are all about memories. Despite what this book implies, Oswald is not literally time traveling. He is being placed in the shoes of some other kid. Spring Bonnie constantly beckons for Oswald to follow him, and Spring Bonnie attempts to kill him, especially, for example, on page 103. In the final epilogue of Fazbear Frights, we find Millie in the pit, implying the memories in the pit are all from victims, dead people. In that case, Oswald is probably experiencing the memory of a dead child who was not part of the missing children incident, but was killed by Afton after luring him to the back room to witness the incident and then killed alongside them. That also explains why Spring Bonnie comes out of the pit in the first place, and is so persistent in killing Oswald. Even in the 8-bit escape minigame in this book, Spring Bonnie puts a hat on each of the missing kids, and then he tries to put one on Oswald's head. Oswald, or whoever's memory he is infiltrating, is the 6th kid. But maybe we'll discuss this further in a future theory video. But that's everything there is to talk about for this video. I hope you guys have enjoyed, and if you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to. As I said, I'm trying to get back to making videos more regularly again, so hopefully I'm able to stick to that. I have a bunch of videos planned where I'll likely be talking about stuff relating to the Stitch Wraith Stingers, and a lot of Into the Pit related videos as well. So stay tuned, but until then, I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye guys!